Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for January 7th, 2022. Our first meeting of 2022 and also the first one in 3 weeks since we didn't meet on Christmas Eve nor New Year's Eve. I'm Benji Fisher moderating, and also present are Aaron McHale sharing his screen, and Enrique Mendez, Ralph Kohler, and Thomas Howell. So I don't think any of us are certified usability experts, but we do have a variety of backgrounds, which is very helpful for usability discussions. I know we have backend developers and site builder. I'm not sure. Ralph, remind me, what's your role? Are you front-end developer, designer, site builder? You're muted if you're answering.
I've typed in content strategy mostly and site building.
Thank you. So anyway, Aaron, go ahead. Remember to read the issue for the recording.
Sure, and content strategy role might be quite useful for the issue we're about to talk about, actually. So I'm going to be looking at the first issue that we're looking at here is this issue, which is issue number 2752511. Update location.hash when clicking a vertical tab. Now, we looked at this issue last year in 2021, but some months back, and we didn't have any sort of solid recommendations out of this at the time. We couldn't come to a particular consensus. I took an action to go away and consult with some usability colleagues, and I got some resources, but then didn't follow up on it. So I'm finally getting around to following up on it. So I thought I'd present this again at the meeting as well, since it's been so long ago that we looked at this. Essentially, the idea is that with and I'll demonstrate this in a second because it's kind of hard to see the screenshots here, but with the vertical tabs that you get on like a node edit form, for instance, you can click on them to expose different parts of the form. And the idea is that should update the hash in the URL so that you can quite, you essentially could have a short link that takes you to a particular tab. So I will I'll just demonstrate. This is just the most up-to-date Drupal 9.4 running the Umami demo, and this is the account settings form here. So the current behavior is that if you click on one of these tabs, you can see they navigate, but nothing changes in the URL. What you can do though is, and I didn't know this because this was done in I think in Drupal 6, but you can actually you can put a hash into the URL based on the ID of one of these tabs, and it will take you there. So for instance, if I copy this and I come back over here and I paste it, it should take me, oh well, it was working like a minute ago and now it doesn't work, but that is, I suppose, the live demos. Let me just see, because I think I might have to refresh. There it goes. Yeah, so you can see it took me that specific tab instead of just to the first tab, which is the default behavior. So I'm just going to apply the patch from this issue to demonstrate what is different. And I've done that, so I'll just clear the cache.
Actually, oh, you already applied the patch. I just wanted to check first what the effect is on the browser's back button of not changing the hash.
I can test that because I haven't changed reloaded the page yet. So if you hit back and forward, nothing changes at the moment. So that is something I think that the patch would actually address. So you can see as I hit forward, it entered the hash, but nothing changed here in the tab. So now if I refresh this page, as before, it'll take me to this tab. But now if I click on another tab like the one above, if you notice the hash in the URL changed, I can do it again for here and here and here, and if you can see the hash up here is changing as I do that. And so when I hit enter on the URL, it will take me, again, when you load the page, it will take me to that specific tab. Whereas as I said, that was happening before, but it wasn't particularly obvious. So one of the advantages that was noted to doing this is then it makes it obvious to people that you can actually link to these, because before you would have had absolutely no idea that you could actually link to a particular hash and it will take you to a tab. When we looked at this previously, as I said, we didn't really have we couldn't come up with any particular solid recommendations here. So I went away, and one of the most useful resources I found was this. I was given this article. Interestingly, I suppose somewhat ironically, I'm going to use the location hash
Actually,
to just jump to
Aaron,
link. Yeah.
Slow down. I'm going to ask the same question as last time. Can you show us what the effect of that was on the back?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So
in your browser.
so we're currently on the pending approval tab. So if I hit back, no, it actually, yeah, I think it's because it was reloading the page. Let me let me refresh this without any hash. Okay, and then I'm going to click around a couple of times, and hopefully, in theory, if we hit back, it should take us back. So it's not. Yeah, so the browser locations don't seem to work as expected. So that would be something that could be addressed in the issue to rectify it, so that if you use so that it updates the actual history, because I guess it's not updating the location history when you navigate around these tabs. At least that's what it appears to be doing. Oh, it did. It looks like it worked that time. Oh no, I think it is actually. Okay. Maybe it was just being a bit temperamental on my end. So yeah, I can see if I hit forward and back, it is going back and forward through the tabs. So that is, so that's interesting. Does that answer your question, Benji?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. So I'll just, to pop back to this article, and I've linked this in Slack, but I can drop a link to this in the Zoom chat and there's also a link to it in the meeting issue if anybody wants a specific link. It's a pretty straightforward URL. I'm just going to jump to about a third of the way down the article, as I said, using a location hash, which is, I suppose, somewhat fitting for this meeting. And the part I want to really highlight is the thing this article talked about is when panels become our views. So it talks about a panel being something like this. So like this is a different panel to this part of the form that changes when you select a tab. It describes those as panels. And it sort of uses the term views to distinguish in, say, like a single page application, if the entire page was changing. I think this particular paragraph here is pretty good. When single page application views are typically intended to seem like distinct web pages or regions in a web page, so that in the story they should be told, here are some here are some decisions to make. I think actually, I don't know if it's meant to just go on to this, but yeah, I think it's talking about these. Most of these are most of this article is about the sort of technical details of how you might implement it. I thought it was quite good because it touches on some of the more sort of nuanced usability details. So I think, as I said last time we looked at this, we couldn't really come to a solid recommendation, but having spoken to some sort of pretty experienced colleagues in usability, one particular colleague, they made me think about what is the purpose for this. So, you know, if you're navigating through these tabs, you know, first of all, who's it going to benefit to change the location in the URL? And I guess it doesn't really fit into the wider context of this page. Like when you change these tabs up here, obviously the URL changes. But from my perspective, I don't know if it really makes sense for the URL to be changing when you click through these, especially if, you know, there was multiple, it's unlikely, but if there was a page that had multiple sets of these, like sort of tabbed interfaces on them, and potentially could there be a conflict in the URL? You know, if you had an email section like this, but then below it there was a completely separate one, but just by chance the IDs were shared, something like that. So there's potential conflicts there. So I think that's everything I wanted to say on this. It was a lot there. So happy to open up for discussion now if anybody has any points they want to add or share.
Let me just mention that Offer Shal has joined the meeting. Yeah, and any comments? Any strong feelings? Go ahead.
I might have one. One issue I see is on the initial page load, when you get to the people accounts page, you automatically get, now could you scroll down please again?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And then basically welcome new users, user created by administrator is pre-selected and shown, but you don't have the direct link to it. So that's a bit of a problematic situation. If you at a later point get back to the welcome, then the URL gets updated and you have the link to it. But
actually it updates even if you just click on this tab. So even though it's the active one, if I click, when I clicked on it, it updates the location here. Which is interesting.
In my humble opinion, if you go to for the first time to the accounts page, it should already show the edit email admin created, like when you go to it for the second time.
Yeah.
If you want to apply the pattern consistently. Otherwise, I consider it confusing.
So I guess, so you're saying that if you were to, if we just go back here, for instance, so if you go into account settings, it should pre-populate the URL.
Pre-populate your URL for the welcome for the selected tab by default.
I suppose that highlights on an issue again. If you had like more than one of these field sets or whatever we want to call them, like tab groups, like how do you address that situation is also problematic in the case you just mentioned. I suppose the opposite of that would be like don't have any tab selected by default and it just is a blank area and you can then select a tab. But I don't know if that creates one more click potentially that isn't present right now.
So I think a related and more common usability concern is that use of the tabs at the top of the page. And is it clear to users that if you've made some changes on, say, the settings tab, and then you click on manage fields without clicking submit, that you're going to lose those changes?
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, so just to illustrate that. So are you, so from what you're saying there, because I think I've thought of this point in the past that like we use the horizontal tabs, to communicate like you're changing a page, you're changing a form, and the vertical tabs we try to communicate those in a way that you're just moving through a part of the form. So
also in the chat, Enrique asks, following the idea of adding the hash, once you click in a tab, it would change the URL. But if it click outside the tab, would it erase the hash? I'm guessing no.
No, it would stay there. And I think if I do this, it will go. No, it didn't, but I think it was, I think one of the things that was supposed to happen is when you press, if you navigate directly to this URL, it's supposed to like scroll you down to this section, but I guess that just isn't working. Or maybe that was not added to the latest patch. So, does anybody have any particularly strong feelings as to whether this is a good idea to implement or not? I'm a bit torn, but I'm kind of leaning on the side of like this isn't a good idea. It's not a bad idea. It's just not a good idea.
So I think it's helpful that so the behavior, as I understand it, is that if we don't have this patch and you went to the current URL with the hash, it will take you to this page, but will put you on the wrong like horizontal tab on these lower email tabs, so that you would show up with the welcome new user created by administrator tab selected and not admin.
No, so I think
So-
it actually will do that, and that was something that was a behavior that was introduced something like all the way back in Drupal 6. The thing that this patch does is if you do that, it won't, and you click to another tab, it won't change the hash.
Okay, so
This patch will change the hash in the
so
URL.
this is only changing the hash. I mean,
But
I guess what
yeah.
that means is you've got hidden information, which isn't great. But I have a lot of problems with the fact that you've got two things that I think of as a tab with two very different behaviors. If you click on welcome and you change the word account to accounts for whatever reason, and then you click on welcome and you click back, you click between two of these sub tabs, and you come back, it keeps the change. But if you change which major tab, the ones across the top, it removes the change, which means you have competing behaviors.
Yep.
And so on one hand, you're exposing hidden information. I'm a proponent of that. But you're introducing the fact that you have a differentiated behavior, which means that people can't predict that. They may think that they can do something that they can't. And in this instance, it may be a small issue, but if someone uses that pattern elsewhere, it could be a much larger issue.
Right. So we
introduce a problem while resolving a problem.
Because with if I take I'm just going to revert applying a patch for a second, and then I'll clear the site cache again. And this is of course it's going to take a minute because it always does.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use this tab because that one's, I'll keep the behavior active on this one. If I just paste in this URL, see that time it did actually take me there, but it didn't do it before. But it will take me to, I suppose using the welcome tab as the default tab is probably not a good example, but now if like it's taken me to that tab with it active, but now if I click on the next tab down, the current behavior in like Drupal 9.4 as it is doesn't change that hash. But as you were saying, like if you didn't know that you could, until I saw this issue, I had no idea that you could even do this. Like I just assumed that wasn't possible to go to a specific tab based on a hash. So if you take it out and you navigate around, you would have no idea that that was even possible. So we're kind of, as you said, exposing a behavior that, well, we may or may not think is a good idea.
Right. And I think it's a marginally helpful behavior. I do not love the idea of rewriting this base URL for the top tab to have a hash, because it means that people would always kind of be redirected to a hash URL.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not super ultra keen on that. Because there's a lot of instances where you may hide some of these sub tabs depending upon who's coming there. And so these, like if someone doesn't have access to everything, I want to be able to say, hey, these tabs aren't even visible. They're only there for administrators, but normal folks would be able to still come to the top. I guess right now I have too little information. I'm assuming things that I shouldn't be assuming.
Yeah.
But I definitely dislike differentiated behaviors where two things I think of as tabs behave radically different from one another. One retains information as I move through the form. The other one loses information as I move through the form. Now, if it at least popped up a warning message, so it said, hey, if you switch tabs, you're going to lose this information, then I think it would be less of an issue. But that, I don't know if that's a sub issue. I don't know if that's a sub issue that has to be fixed before this patch would go in. I'm more comfortable with this patch if we can address that other issue.
Mm-hmm. To really make, so finding a way to communicate, or making sure that we're clear about the tabs here behave differently to the tabs up here, right?
Correct. I've just run into this in other websites, like, you're at a bank and you fill out all the information to apply for a credit card, and then you click on another tab and it wipes out all the information you put in the form.
Right.
That's really bad behavior.
I'm mindful that we're approaching sort of half past, and I don't want to, I know there's other issues to look at, so I don't want to take the whole meeting with this one, but I do want to briefly come back to the point about sort of what is a view and what is a panel. So like these are obviously, like, in the context of, say, a single page application, these would be considered panels because you're just navigating through them. Whereas a view, these tabs would be like considered changing a view. And I think actually, I'm going to just completely go off onto Twitter here because I think their settings page does something similar. So apologies if you get to see my Twitter feed for a second. I just want to find, oh, look, eBay is advertising something. Where is account settings? Here is account settings. So I think, go away. So Twitter is basically a full-on single page app, and they don't even use hashes. They just change the URL. But the idea is that then, like, I think it used to be slightly different to this, but you can see that they're using the concept of changing the URL when you change these tabs. But I think it's meant to communicate, like, these are separate forms. So I'm on the, like, password form here, or so that was account information. I go to the change password, the URL changes, but then there's, like, this is a separate form with a separate submit button. It's like it makes it sort of clearer, as you were saying, like, if you don't save this information, you navigate away, this change is not going to be saved, I think is an example of what you were saying there, Thomas.
Yes, that is a perfect example. I think that's also kind of similar to how the Chrome browser configuration settings works as well.
Right. Yeah. And luckily I'm using a Chromium based browser here, so I can show that as well. Yeah, so we can see, like, the same behavior applies. The URL is changing as I'm going through these tabs. Interestingly, when there's no submit buttons for these, because these all just change in real time. Like if I change one of these settings, I don't need to, it just immediately applies. So that's kind of like, I don't know if the ideal world is that, like, Drupal forms just always autosave. Maybe that's a terrible idea, but, like,
it sounds like a config module.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's a behavior you might want to see, but having separate URLs, to me, like, I think of them as paths, and these are different things if you want to call them different forms. But I get that Drupalism is to call it a view versus a panel, but that is such an obscure differentiator because there's no real visual, or I shouldn't say the visual, because again, that's not accessible, but, like, there's no easy way to tell the difference between these things from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think that I wouldn't call it Drupalism. I think that was actually more coming from those terms came from this article here, talking about more in the context of a single page application, which obviously Drupal isn't. Maybe it will be in the future, but right now it isn't. So yeah, I'd like to obviously bring this discussion to a close and be able to comment on the issue. So hopefully that gives me, once I review the recording, that will give me enough to pull together some points. Again, I don't know if have we reached a sort of natural consensus on this? Is there particular recommendations we can quite strongly make here, or should we just is it worth me pulling together the discussion and then seeing what comes out of that?
Okay, well, let's see if we have consensus. It seems to me that we have two strong arguments against implementing this. And the first is one that Aaron brought up, that there could be two sets of vertical tabs on the page, and then it is really unclear what's supposed to happen when you add a page anchor like this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of potential for conflict. And the second is that we have these vertical tabs and we have the tabs at the top of the page, I guess horizontal tabs. And they have really different behavior. One causes a full page reload, making you lose any changes you've entered on the form, and the other doesn't. And it's not great that you can lose the information. In fact, it's pretty bad that you have the potential for losing information if you don't understand how it works. But we should not make it worse by blurring the distinction between the vertical tabs and the horizontal tabs. And by making the URL change, it seems to me we're blurring the distinction by making it so that you can move back and forth with your browser's forward and back buttons. You're blurring the distinction between the vertical tabs and the horizontal tabs. So that seems to me like a drawback.
Right. And that's potentially a really big problem if you accidentally hit back. If you assume like I can go here, hit back, but you hit back one too many times and then back takes you to manage fields and you just lost all your changes. So I think that's probably quite a good summary. Thank you, Benji, and for everyone who contributed. As I said, I'll once we've got the recording, I'll write this all up into hopefully a somewhat concise comment, and maybe I will share it before posting it just to make sure we're all on the same page here, because it's certainly this is much more nuanced than some of the other things we typically tackle here.
Yeah, anyone else want to chime in, either in the chat or by speaking up or by giving us a thumbs up? Do we have consensus, or are the people who've been talking a lot the only ones who have opinions on this? Ralph is giving us a +1 thumbs up.
And I might have one related issue on the page about the concept of the vertical tab. We could take a look afterwards, maybe quickly, if you are already on the page.
Is it to do with like the tabs on the page here?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't checked it in 7. I've checked only in Claro. But if you narrow your browser screen,
let's see how this works. Okay. Hold on, I'm just having to like now rearrange my screen. Yeah, so like this.
Yeah, exactly. Not even okay. I guess then it's a Claro thing, because the display is still the same, but in Claro it switches similar to the.
Oh, I know what you mean. Yes.
Because yeah, it gets to a one-column view of your tabs. Yeah. And
I think I can just quickly install Claro, and I know exactly what you mean. I say quickly, I mean, I do have Usability installed, so there's a lot of content translations to enable now. Normally, it would be a one very quick click, but we just set it as the admin theme. Claro is probably a more up-to-date, obviously, example to use here. Oh, that's so nice. I love Claro. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so this is what you're talking about. This
exactly.
Yeah.
And with the toggle, I would expect, for example, that I'm able to close that tab or that however
Right.
you want to
You
call it.
can, yeah.
But you are unable to. But for example, if you go to the node creation form, in contrast, on that width,
content. Yep. 1 second. I hit the home page and it was trying to load everything. So I'll do basic page. Yeah. So I noticed this behaves a lot differently.
No, if you narrow the screen down, then it also switches to the same.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this seems to be a sort of have some kind of overrides, and I did notice this because I was going to test it on this. I was actually going to use the node add form as an example, but the behavior seems to be sort of customized for node form, so I didn't want to use this as the example. But yeah, it is.
But from a visual aspect here, it's completely identical to the other view, but or the other page, but completely different behavior.
Yeah, I just apply the patch, and hopefully I don't need to clear the cache, but we'll find out. It might be, yeah, I don't know if, anyway, yeah, I know this is maybe this behavior needs to be replicated, because this is the ability to actually close this is it improves the experience a lot more than, like, if I'm over here, if I refresh this again, like if I want to get to one of the tabs down here, I have to scroll down, I open it, but then I have to scroll back up. Whereas if I could just close it, I can't close it, that would make the experience better.
There is also another issue with CK Editor 5 I've discovered. Then you get also some sort of auto closing and jumping.
Oh, okay.
I've linked in the chat. That makes things even more obscure and complicated. But that's exclusive for the CK Editor preferences.
Sure.
Aaron, could you open up that link from the chat just so we could
yeah, let me
have a quick look at least. Get it in the recording.
I'm going to maximize the window again.
324-6188.
Yep.
Vertical tabs auto collapse on viewports smaller than 1360 pixels on certain configuration actions.
Okay. I'm wondering, actually, Benji, is it worth us putting this as an issue to look at for a future meeting, or after we've looked at the next issue? Because I know we have other issues to look at.
Well, that's sort of up to Ralph. Is this something you're prepared to talk about? Want to talk about?
I don't think there's a real necessity. I just provided it for the context and for some additional open issues, but it's basically already, there is no need of a review at the moment. It's more of a fix on the coding side at the moment.
Okay.
And it's already assigned to BNGMM. So.
Yeah, I see you were the one who reported it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, if you think we need to, we can always bring it up. If you think we need to look at it again.
Yeah.
And Ben Mullins, that's right. He sometimes joins these meetings.
So I guess the only other thing to mention is perhaps we've discovered that this behavior would actually be, the ability to close the tab would be good to have on every other kind of these other tabs here. And that is, so maybe that's a separate issue that could be, if anybody wants to take an action to investigate if that's already an issue that exists, and if not, maybe we could get one opened about that.
Yeah, that definitely seems like a problem and may or may not already have an issue for it. Are we ready to move on?
Yeah, I think so. Do you want me to stop sharing?
Sure. And first, are there any other issues that people would like to talk about? Because the only other issue that has been suggested, it is an issue that we've looked at before, but I haven't looked at it recently. And Derek, or DWW, requested that we have another look. So let's see. So the issue is 315-0294. And open it another tab so I can jump to the top. New translations for moderated nodes are not created in the initial workflow state. And so, as I recall, there was a question there. It causes some problems, and I guess the usability issue here is what the admin experience for configuring the various options. And let's just have a quick look at the problem description. So we've defined a workflow with 3 states, and there are 2 different roles. If you enable content moderation and content translation modules, and add a second language so you can actually translate, enable translation for at least 1 content type, and then edit the editorial workflow. So you have a content type that's both translatable and has this content moderation flow. Configure some transitions for content moderation, and you have 1 role, the editor role, who can use any transition, and an author role who has limited transitions. An author creates a node in English, sets it to needs review. Now the author wants to add a translation for this node. They go to the Translate tab, click on the Add button, and then the form where they can edit the node. And so the translation form is displayed, but when they click Save, they get an error message. So that's what the problem is. As I said, it's a real problem, and we need to provide other options. And the problem is that the translated node is created in a workflow state that the author role doesn't have access to. So there are a bunch of options, and the question was the usability question is the admin experience. How do we present the various options on the configuration form? Any questions before I go to the recent comment? So again, the usability question here is really a small part of the issue. It's just, how do we present these new options in the admin form? At least that's how I remember it. And the recent comment is, I think, a bunch of replies to a code review. But then I think at the end of this comment, some possible approaches. A, rename the UI for the new current settings to more accurately explain the current/legacy behavior. If we keep just 2 options, I'd strongly consider naming this one legacy, not current. Option B, provide 3 options in the new workflow plugin settings for the behavior. 1, default, which is the new thing we're adding here. 2, current, another new behavior we'd have to implement properly, what the existing patch explains. Or 3, legacy, existing hard-coded behavior of only draft versus published. Don't think we can plow forward with the current disagreement between the UI text and the actual behavior. I do think we're going to have to keep supporting the current behavior, so we're going to have to figure out what to call it and how to explain how it works to site builders configuring workflows. I'm afraid that's a little too complicated, and maybe we shouldn't try to figure it out until someone has had a closer look and can sort of demonstrate what the
Benji?
problem is. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you scroll down to the last comment there? Derek provided a suggestion, an initial one. At the bottom, you see the screenshot. That is his current take. Initial moderation state when adding a new translation, and then the 2 options, default moderation state and legacy behavior, either published or draft, depending on the current moderation state of the original content.
So that looks reasonably clear to me. It's a little long, that second line.
I would have 2 suggestions or comments about that. I've already taken a look before the meeting, and for a user who is new to that page and trying to navigate, it's difficult comprehension-wise, because what is the default moderation state is one question, and the other, for the second link, you have to read long. First, legacy behavior, either published or draft. In both cases, you don't exactly know what the actual state is, and from a microcopy standpoint, front loading is better for the key aspects, because the intention of the person using that form is to know what's the initial moderation state is, and he or she wants to set it. So for my suggestion would be, for example, for the first, instead of default moderation state, use some sort of dynamic variable, so that you say front loaded and say draft the default moderation state. If, for example, for that content moderation workflow, draft is the set default moderation state. And for the other one, maybe something like published with draft as fallback with the explanation afterwards, because in the text above, it is explained that at first it is tried to accomplish, to apply publish to everything, and only in case it's impossible, then it is falled back to draft. Well, I'm not a native speaker, so wording wise, I'm hesitant to give suggestions, but just from the content itself or how to approach it, I would vote for front loading it and make it more explicit.
So I've copied down here, I've typed into the text area this second line, legacy behavior, either published or draft, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what you have in mind by front loading is to rearrange it and start with current moderation state, then say either published or draft, Then at the end, mention this is the legacy behavior. Would that be what you have in mind for front loading?
No, front loading would mean that the actual moderation state is at the start of the string, meaning in that case, published. And or draft is also a bit vague, because from my understanding, the main focus is onto published, and only if published isn't applicable in any case, then it is falled back to draft.
I kind of, the word legacy doesn't quite sit right with me unless we're intending to remove this behavior in like a later update. But if we're not, then the word legacy kind of implies that this is an older behavior that's not going to be supported, or like it, to me, it implies that you, like the site builder knows what the legacy behavior did. So unless there's plans to actually remove that behavior in the future, I would kind of avoid that word.
I see in the chat, Ralph has given us a couple of links. So those first two, I think, are just to.
The first two were from before, not related to the current issue.
Okay, and actually, one of them is just the pasting into the Zoom chat, the link to the issue we are looking at. And the other one you just put in is www.nngroup.com/articles/first two words of a signal for scanning. And that last part is a bunch of words hyphenated. Summary, telling how well people understand link's first 11 characters shows whether sites write for users who typically scan rather than read lists of items. So this is sort of the formal justification and evidence for front loading, as you put it. So yeah, making the first two words legacy behavior sort of doesn't tell us what it does. So that's a poor way to start off the option. So am I getting closer here to what you would like, published or draft at the start?
Yeah, it's closer, but published or draft is also confusing from a user perspective, because as a user, I would be unsure and uncertain what would be chosen. Is it published or is it draft?
I have a couple of more fundamental problems with what's happening here and the keeping of the legacy behavior, or retaining the legacy behavior, or whatever we want to call it. From a compliance standpoint, there are a lot of rules about not supposing to go straight to a published state for content that has been edited by someone without that permission set. So like there's a certain like coupled approach in terms of how I think about the content and what I would have expected. Like I haven't worked much with translations, so this is relatively new for me, but I'd be really surprised by that legacy behavior. Like if someone who if anyone, even if they had permissions, were to publish upon save of something that they had drafted for the first time, a translation, that would be incredibly surprising, and it would make it really difficult to because there's nothing here between either of those radio buttons that tells me from a compliance standpoint, I'm able to break a behavior that I've told all my other content that it has to go through a progressive process of validation and is to reach a published state. And the legacy behavior essentially allows for a default circumvention of my moderation states. So I would prefer that if we wanted to retain that, it would be a contrib module that someone could add in to revert to the old way of doing things, rather than even having that radio button there at all. Like I would prefer an established, predictable process that was just the way Drupal worked out of the box. And for people who wanted to revert because they liked breaking the rules, then they could. But I wouldn't put it in, I wouldn't put that in any easy to find, like I wouldn't make it part of core. I don't, because those behaviors really are pretty radically different, but it's not clear. And I don't think you can make it easily clear in a usable fashion with just a couple of radio buttons.
So I think that discussion is getting outside of the usability. I also think that it actually leads to behavior described at the top of the issue, that when you try to translate it, you get an error message. So
well, it comes down to, like, in my mind, this is the wrong solution to the problem. The solution to the problem is all content should go through expected moderation states. If someone has permission to publish something, they simply click two buttons. They click and it goes into its draft state, and they click again, and now they can get it to published.
Well, if they have permission to publish nodes, then that would be what happens. And the way to control the moderation is not to give them permission to do that.
Right. I'm just saying that it is an unexpected behavior. And from a compliance perspective, it is not ideal for someone to be able to take a translation and push, because the translation is still new writing. Even if it's a translation of something that is there, it is new writing.
So I think it's the responsibility of the site builder to make sure that that compliance is met. And there's already been discussion on the issue that we can't just change configuration of existing sites. So if existing sites are using the current behavior, which is going to be the legacy behavior, we can't just change it on them.
Then you would
have to enable them to change it.
You'd go through the same process that you would with anything else, though. Then you move the behavior off into a module that's eventually going to be removed in a major version change. Like, this radio button is not the right solution.
We can't break existing sites.
I'm not saying break the existing site.
We have to support the existing configuration.
How would we deal with any behavior that we needed to change in Drupal 10? That would be or by Drupal 11. Like, what is the process to remove it? And it should be a module that you turn off and on. A radio button is it. From a usability perspective, as a site builder, this is it doesn't make sense.
So I think what you're saying is equivalent of why we have a CK Editor 5 module is experimental right now.
Right. And I just know we've done this before.
Yeah.
I don't like adding UI things that will keep it indefinitely when I understand we don't want to break sites. So I would go with whatever our process in the past has been to move progressively away from a behavior that we don't want in the site.
Is this, building on that point, and again, apologies to, I'm not going to say something that's about usability specifically, but is this a big enough breaking change that actually we need a new, like, version of the content translation module? Like, you know, like as you know, like we had CK Editor, now we have the CK Editor 5 module ready to exist in parallel, but the natural upgrade path is you enable the CK Editor 5 module and disable CK Editor 4, and that will be the upgrade path to go from 9 to 10. So do we need a similar, I guess what I'm thinking is, is this a big enough change that we need a similar path for this? Because I feel weird about, as I said, the word legacy kind of feels a bit weird to me. It's like, well, are we getting rid of that? Like, are we deprecating this behavior? Can we convey that in a slightly different way? And I'm just trying to find a way to relate that back to usability, because this isn't the forum for deciding whether we need another module or not. But yeah, that's where I'm at with that.
So we are getting close to the end of the hour. I don't think we understand this issue well enough to say anything definitive, although of course anyone who wants to is welcome to post a comment on the issue. Any last closing comments on this issue? Anything you're dying to say? Okay, so if you do have time to look at the issue, think about it some more. We can certainly bring it up again next week. And until then, thank you for attending. And again, Happy New Year. And I hope to see many of you next week.
Thanks,
Thanks,
thanks
everyone.
Benji.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice afternoon and evening.